Hey friends, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Nun Aleph, Daf 51 of Masechta Yevamos. Friends, Daf 51, we continue talking about the opinion of Rabbi Gamliel and the Chachamim about if there is get achar get, if there is maimer achar maimer. So just to kind of understand those opinions. So let's jump in on the bottom of the Nun Amud Beis, all the way at the bottom. Amar Rava says, Rav, my time with Rabbi Gamliel. How come Rabbi Gamliel says that there's maimer achar maimer? No, how come Rabbi Gamliel says ein maimer achar maimer and that ein get achar get? The misapkale get idochi ilo dochi, maimer ikani ilo kani. So the reason is, well, because look, Rabbi Gamliel is not sure if a get is really dissolves the yibum or not, or if maimer actually makes them married or not. Right, so again, my time with Rabbi Gamliel, the misapkale beget, the misapkale is uncertain. Get, when it comes to get, idachi, lo dachi, does it break up the maimer or not, the yibum or not? Maimer ikani, lo kani, and when he does maimer, does it actually like make a marriage or not? Get idachi, lo dachi, I kama dachi, baser my kovid. So, and therefore, Rabbi Gamliel says, so let's say you have, so let's say you have sorry, right? So let's say you have Shimon, and he does Yibum. Right? So let's say Reuven was married to Sarah and to Rivka, and then Reuven dies, and now Shimon does gives a get to Sarah, and then he gives a get to Rivka. So if the get that he gave to Sarah works, right? So basa maika ovid. So if the get is like basically breaks up the yibum, so then that's it. It's broken up. What's the point of doing? Right? There's nothing. He's not doing anything with Rivka. Ikama lo dachi, basa nami lo dachi. And if by giving a get to Sarah it doesn't make any difference, so then certainly it doesn't make any difference for Rivka either. So either way you cut it, whether the get is effective for Sarah or whether it's not effective for Sarah, it's not going to be effective for Rivka. Maimer ikani ilokani, and he's not sure whether maimer is kone or not for Rivka. As a concept, if maimer is kone or not. So ikama kani baso maika ovid. Now, if Shimon is if maimer works by Sarah, so the Zeh worked by Sarah. So when he does maimer with Rivka, it's irrelevant. Ikama lokani baso nami lokani, and if the maimer that Shimon does with Sarah is ineffective, well then Mamela it's also ineffective with Rivka. So either way you look at it, the get is going to be ineffective for Rivka, and the maimer is going to be ineffective for Rivka. So therefore, Rabbi Gamliel says, "Ein get achar get and ein maimer achar maimer." Eisvei Abaye asks a kasha against Rava. Umod Rabbi Gamliel sheyesh get achar maimer umaimer achar haget. Now, Abaye asks a kasha on Rava. He says, look, Rabbi Gamliel admits that while ein get achar get and ein maimer achar maimer, there is get achar maimer and there is maimer achar get. So, so let's say now, for example, we have a situation where you have Reuven is married to Sarah, and then Reuven dies, and there's Shimon and Levi. Okay? And then Shimon gives a get to Sarah, and then Levi does maimer with Sarah. So there is right? Both of those work, right? There is get, right? There is maimer achar get, and there is get achar maimer, right? So while there wouldn't be get achar get, and there wouldn't be maimer achar maimer, but there is maimer achar get, and there is get achar maimer. So Moder Rabbi Gamliel admits sheish get achar maimer, that there's get after maimer, or maimer achar get. V'get achar bia umaimer, umaimer achar bia v'get. And also, if you have a situation where there were 3 sisters, right? So let's say with one you do give a get, the other one you do bia, the other one you do maimer. So all 3 apply, right? So again, right? So So the get achar bia u'maimer, right? So if you do mimer with one, right? If Shimon, let's say, does mimer with Sarah, and then he does bia with Rivka, and then he gives a get to Rachel, right? U'maimer achar bia v'get, or he gives a get to Sarah, and he does mimer, and he does bia with Rivka, and he gives a get, and he does mimer with Rachel. So Rabbi Gamliel agrees in all of those cases, right? Maimer achar get achar maimer, get achar maimer uvia, maimer achar get uvia. In all of these cases, Rabbi Gamliel admits that that it would apply. So while maimer achar maimer is not a thing and get achar get is not a thing, these other combinations are a thing. And if Rabbi Gamliel is uncertain whether, right, the get is a proper get or the mimer is a proper mimer, tave kibia delichatchila v'tikne. Well, then the bia should be like a proper bia, and it should it should be kona. Meaning, what Abaye is saying is, look, according to you, Rava, you're explaining Rabbi Gamliel that he's uncertain if the get works or if it doesn't work. Black and white, right? Either the get works or it doesn't work. Either the mimer works or it doesn't work. But says Abaye, based on that, then I don't understand how Rabbi Gamliel can say that, if he does get with one wife, and then bia with the other one, and then mimer with the third, so all three are effective, or if he does mimer with the first, and then bia with the second one, and then gives a get to the third, also all three work. I don't understand, because mimanavshach, if the get that he gives to the first works, so then already the bia, right, the yibum is dissolved, and therefore the bia and the mimer that he does afterwards are irrelevant. If the get does not work, so then the get was irrelevant, but then when he does bia, then that's yibum, and therefore the mimer that comes afterward is irrelevant, right? So therefore, right, either way you kind of, or whether mimer comes first, whatever it is, right, says Abaye that according to you, Rave, that Rabbi Gamliel isn't sure how to relate to get and how to relate to mimer. Well, then based on that, in the case where you do, get bia mimer or mimer bia get, either way, once you get to bia, then, definitely by then you did something about the yibum. Either you dissolved the yibum, or you did you did yibum. But by the time you get to the third saret, yibum has been done one way or another. The Atanan, as we learn in the Mishnah, that when it comes to bia, when it is the first thing to be done, so then that's it. There's nothing after that, right? And therefore, if the get is effective, let's say with the first tzar, so if the get is effective, then yibum is over at that point. If it's ineffective, well then the bia that he does with the second tzara is sort of the first thing that's happening, and then ein acharei klum, there's nothing after that. So then, the mimer that comes afterwards should be irrelevant. But Rabbi Gamliel is saying that all three are relevant. So Elamar Abaye, rather says Abaye, the olam pshitale, really, it's clear to Rabbi Gamliel that it's clear to Rabbi Gamliel, beget to dachi mimer dekani, that the get is like doche, but only to an extent. It's only like 50% doche. Umimer dekani, and that mimer, it works as like a marriage channel, but also only to an extent. Miu Omer Abanon Hayivama Bechad Tzad Mehane Ba Get Uvechad Tzad Mehane Ba Mimer. Get Acher Get Lo Dachi Da Dachale Kama Umimer Acher Mimer Lo Kani Da Kani Le Kama. So let's read that again. Hello, Amar Abaye. So says Abaye, le'olam pshita Rabbi Gamliel beget doche u'maymer dekani. So it's clear to Rabbi Gamliel that get is doche, but only to an extent, and maymer is kona to an extent. Miu Amar Rabbanan, but the rabbi said, in general, ha'yivama, that when it comes to Sarah, right? So if you have Reuven was married to Sarah, Reuven dies, and now there's Shimon and Levi. So with regard to Sarah, b'chad tzad mani ba get, u'v'chad tzad mani ba maymer. So kilu, she has like the capacity to like have this sort of 50% get, and also the capacity for like 50% mimer, so to speak, right? Meaning, that when it comes to get, by a Yevama, it works, but it's not a full-fledged get. It's like a 50% kind of get. And also Mimer it's not like a proper Kiddushin, it's like a 50% Kiddushin. And Sarah can kind of handle like up to 50% worth of get and up to 50% worth of Mimer. So get acher get lo dachi. So now, if Shimon gives a get to Sarah and then Levi gives a get to Sarah, so Levi's Sarah is ineffective because like Shimon already used the get, right? So the hadacha le kam, Levi's get is ineffective because it was sort of preceded by Shimon's get. Umaymer acher Mimer lo kani, and Mimer, right? If Shimon does Mimer and then Levi does Mimer, it doesn't work. Da kani le kam, because Shimon already did Mimer, and that sort of used up her capacity for Mimer. So get acher Mimer, Umaymer acher get. However, if Shimon did Mimer and then Levi did get, so beseder, Shimon sort of used up her 50% capacity for Mimer, and then Levi used up the remaining 50% capacity that she has for get, and also vice versa. Haimilsa kadachi, vaimilsa kakani. So, Shimon is like, let's say if Shimon's giving a get, so he's sort of, like applying her 50% capacity for get, and then Levi's applying her 50% capacity for Mimer. Alright, what do you want me to tell you? Rabbanon, whereas the rabbis say, Kol chad v'chad, takinu le Rabbanon get u'Mimer b'Yevamo. Whereas the rabbis who say that yesh get acher get and yesh Mimer acher Mimer, so they say, look, both Shimon and Levi have the ability to do Mimer and get. So therefore, therefore, Shimon can give a get to Sarah, and that will be like 50% effective, and Levi can also give a get to Sarah, and that will also be like 50% effective. Each one has the ability to give a get. It doesn't like get used up when one of them gives it, and therefore, according to the rabbis, you can kind of do get acher get and yibu and Mimer acher Mimer. There isn't like a sort of quota, so to speak, that gets like used up. And now the Gemara says, "Va'bia psula adifum mimer ugriya mimer." Okay, this bia psula, what's that? It's talking about the bia that he does in the middle, right? Right. We talked about that. If he does, mimer with, Sarah, and then bia with Rivka, and then gives a get to Rachel. So we say all three are effective. So va'bia psula, this bia is adifum mimer v'griya mimer. In some respects, it's stronger than mimer. In other respects, it's weaker than mimer. Adifum mimer dilu mimer acher mimer lo mahani. Right? Rabbi Gamliel says that if he, does mimer and then he does bia, or let's say the opposite. Rabbi Gamliel says that if you do mimer and then mimer, it doesn't work. Right? A mimer acher mimer. So Rabbi Gamliel says mimer after mimer does not work, and yet he's saying that if you do mimer and then bia and then get, it does work. I.e., that bia after mimer works. While mimer after mimer doesn't work, bia after mimer does work. So in that sense, it's stronger than mimer. V'ilu, where am I? So griya mimer. So adifa mimer. So it's stronger than mimer. Dilu mimer after mimer lo mahani, because mimer after mimer doesn't work. V'ilu bia after mimer mahani. Whereas Rabbi Gamliel is saying that bia after mimer seems to work. V'griya mimer, but at the same time, it's also weaker than mimer. Dilu mimer acher aget. Kanya l'chule shira de get, vilubi acher get lo kanya l'chule shira de get. And in some respects, mimer is stronger than bia in that Rabbi Gamliel would say that if you first gave a get, right? If Shimon gave a get and then Levi did mimer, so the mimer would, right? So the Shimon's get would account for like 50% of Sarah's capacity, and Levi's mimer would sort of apply to account for like the other 50% of her capacity. Whereas, right, so in that case, the mimer is sort of like scooping up all the remaining capacity that Sarah has for like mimer or chalitza or get. Yet when Shimon does a get, it gives a get to Sarah, does a get, and it's followed by bia, and then chalitza, and then mimer. So even after the bia, there's still room for mimer, which means that the bia doesn't sort of scoop up all the remaining capacity, and there's still capacity for mimer. So in that respect, Mimer stronger because it scoops up all the remaining capacity, whereas Bia doesn't scoop up all the remaining capacity because there's still room for Mimer. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Ketzad Omer Gamliel Ein Get Acher Get. So how did Rabbi Gamliel say that there's no get after a get? Shtei Yevamos Shnafnu Lifnei Yavim. So let's say Ruvain was married to Sarah and to Rivka. Ruvain dies. So now Shimon has a zika with Sarah and with Rivka. Echad Lifnei Yavim Echad V'nosan Lo get Lazo if you get Lazo, and then Shimon gives a get to Sarah, and then he also gives a get to Rivka. Rabbi Gamliel Omer, so it says Rabbi Gamliel that the get that Shimon gives to Rivka is irrelevant. So Rabbi Gamliel says Choletz Larishona do chalitza with Sarah, right? Because the get that he gave to Rivka is irrelevant. So if you just do chalitza with Sarah, so then also b'krovosel. So then he gave a get to Sarah. He's now doing chalitza with Sarah. He's going to be also to all the relatives of Sarah. Umuta b'krovos shnia, but he'll be permitted to the relatives of Rivka because he gave because he didn't, the get that he gave to Rivka was irrelevant. So he's still permitted to Rivka's relatives. The Chacham say, Nosan get Lazo if you get Lazo. Whereas the Chachamim say that Yesh get Acher get. And therefore when Shimon gives a get to Sarah and then he gives a get to Rivka, also b'krovos shtei. So they're both effective, and therefore he's also to both the relatives of Sarah and the relatives of Rivka. V'chalitza la'achas me'en, and he does chalitza with one of them. Okay. And you can also work this out when, if you have Shimon and Levi with just one Yevama with just Sarah. Fine. How did Rabbi Gamliel say that there's no mimer after mimer? That if you have Sarah and Rivka who have a zika with Shimon, also mimer bazoi, and he does mimer with Sarah, and then he does mimer with Rivka. So according to Rabbi Gamliel, Omer, no sin get l'rishona, v'choletz la v'asa b'krovosel, muta b'krovos. Let's do that again. So Rabbi Gamliel who says ein mimer achar mimer, so that means that when Shimon does mimer with Sarah, so the mimer that he does with Rivka is irrelevant. So Rabbi Gamliel says, look, no sin get l'rishona, so give a get to Sarah to break up, to undo the mimer, v'choletz la. And then after you give a get to Sarah, do chalitza. Ve'asur b'krovosel, and then you're going to be asur to Sarah's relatives, mutar b'krovos shnia, and it'll be permitted to Rivka's relatives, because there was anything, right? He never did right? And the mimer that he did with Rivka was irrelevant. But Chacham Omer is the Chacham say, no sin get l'shtein. Whereas the Chacham say that yesh mimer achar mimer, and therefore, he did mimer with Sarah, he did mimer with Rivka, he has to give a get to both of them. Ve'asur b'krovos shhtein, and he's forbidden to the relatives of both of them, b'chalitza la'achas me'en, and he does chalitza with one of them, b'chenata omer b'shnei yivam v'yivam achas, and you can also work out the same thing when there are two, if there's Shimon and Levi, with just Sarah. Omer Mai, we just said, Nasan get Lazo, we get Lazo, that if Shimon gives a get to Sarah, and then he gives a get to Rivka as well. And we're saying that the get that he gave to Rivka, according to Rabbi Gamliel, is irrelevant. So Rabbi Gamliel says to Rabbi Gamliel, Choletz l'rishona v'asur b'krovosel. Then just do chalitza with Rivka, and just do chalitza with Sarah, and then he's forbidden to Sarah's relatives. Mutar b'krovos shnia, and he's permitted to Rivka's relatives, right? Because he didn't, right? The get that he gave to her is irrelevant, and there's no reason to be asur to Rivka's relatives. But let's say this is a kasha on Shmuel. That Shmuel says, Choletz levailas haget lo nifter et Sarah. You hear that? That according to Shmuel says that in this situation where Shimon gives a get to Sarah, so then he just weakened the zika, right? So if you think about zikas, so when Reuven dies, so Shimon now has a zika with Sarah, and he has a zika with Rivka. When Shimon then gives a get to Sarah, he weakens the zika, the connection that he has with Sarah, and therefore, when he does chalitza with Sarah, it's a weaker chalitza, because it's on a weaker zika, because on account of the get, and therefore that weaker chalitza is not going to be enough to work for Rivka as well, who her zika was never diminished by a get. And therefore, if Rabbi Gamliel is saying that the get that Shimon gives to Rivka is irrelevant, and he's saying that just do chalitza with Sarah, that's implying that the chalitza that he does with Sarah is strong enough to work for Rivka also, which is therefore kasha on Shmuel, who says that the chalitza that he would do with Sarah would not be strong enough for Rivka, since he gave a get to Sarah first. So the Amar Shmuel chalitz levad asaget lo nifter Sarah, that if you do chalitza with Sarah, that would not work for Rivka. Amar lach Shmuel says to you, look, ki ami ona, when I say that if he does chalitza with Sarah, it does not work for Rivka, alibi demand Amar yesh zika. That's because I'm assuming that there is zika, and if there is zika, so then we have to, you had initially a full zika with Sarah, you have a full zika with Rivka, you then give a get to Sarah, that zika is weakened, but Rivka's zika is still in full force, so the chalitza that you do with Sarah is not going to work for Rivka, who still is a starke zika. However, Rabbi Gamliel saver ein zika, whereas Rabbi Gamliel says that there is no zika, and if there's no zika, so then there's no, so then the chalitza that you do with Sarah can memela work for Rivka. Why not? Rabbi Gamliel saver ein zika. So now the Gemara wants to assume that wait. So if we're saying that Rabbi Gamliel holds that there's no zika, then of course we must then assume Rabbanon saver yesh zika, that the rabbis say that there is a zika. Okay, v'katani seifa, and we had said v'chein ata omer b'shnei yivam v'yivama achas, that the same thing applies when you have two yavams and one yavama, right? So if you had Reuven was married to Sarah, Reuven dies, now there's Shimon and Levi, and both Shimon and Levi give a get to Sarah, right? So if we're assuming that the rabbis say that that there is a zika, so there's a zika between Sarah and Shimon, there's a zika between Sarah and Levi, both Shimon and Levi give a get to Sarah, thereby weakening both of their zikas that they have with Sarah. And then we're saying that you can do chalitza with only one of them has to do chalitza. So lemata v'tuvta de Rabba bar Rafuna. So let's say there's a kashan Rabba bar Rafuna amarav. The Rabba bar Rafuna amarav chalitza psula tzrichas la'achzu akol ha'achin. Then when you have a weaker chalitza, all the brothers have to do it. So therefore, when both Shimon and Levi gave a get to Sarah, that meant that their zika is now weaker. And if their zika is weaker, that would be a chalitza psula, sort of a weaker chalitza that they do, in which case both Shimon and Levi should have to do chalitza. How could we say that only one of them has to do chalitza? Amalach Rabba bar Rafuna, bein Rabba Gamliel, bein Rabbanan, savi ein zika. So says Rabba bar Rafuna, he would say no. The inference the assumption that you made that if Rabbi Gamliel holds ein zika, then the Rabbanan must hold yesh zika, that's not true. They both hold ein zika. They're only arguing about whether there's get acher get or whether there's maimer acher maimer, but they don't argue about zika, and therefore any inference that you make about a weaker zika and a weaker chalitza isn't relevant, because the rabbis hold that there is no zika. Amar Mai, we said earlier. Also, maimer bozoi, that if Shimon does maimer with Sarah and does maimer with Rivka, Gamliel Omer says to Gamliel, no sin get la rishona, so you can give a get to the first one, v'choletz la, and then you do chalitza, v'asa b'krova, and he's forbidden to her relatives, v'mutter b'krova shnia, and he's permitted to the relatives of Rivka. Michdei, correct the Gemara 1 second, kasav Rabbi Gamliel, ein maimer acher maimer. That says Rabbi Gamliel, there's no maimer acher maimer, i.e., Shimon does maimer with Sarah, that's a proper maimer. The maimer that he does with Rivka is irrelevant. Rishona nami tisyabin. So why don't you let Shimon do a full-fledged yibum with Sarah? What's the normal way to do yibum? Well, first you do maimer, then you do yibum. So if we're saying that Shimon does maimer with Sarah, the maimer that he does with Rivka is irrelevant. So shouldn't he just be able to do, so he did maimer with Sarah, can he then continue just do yibum? Why do we say that they have to get divorced and then do chalitza? So well, we're concerned that if you do yibum with Sarah, you may also end up doing yibum with Rivka, which we don't want. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, says Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Gamliel, Uve Shammai, Reb Shimon, Uve Nazai, Reb Nechemya, Kulu Svirlu Maimer Kona Kinyan Gomer. They all hold that Maimer is a starke Kinyan. Rabbi Gamliel had Amorin, Rabbi Gamliel, that which we said, right? That ein Maimer acher Maimer. that kilu, when you do mimer, that's it. It's a right. It's a full-fledged mimer, and there's nothing left for the other one. Beis Shammai ditnan. Beis Shammai is in the Mishnah. Shlosha achin. You have three brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Shnai men nesum l'shtei achayis. Reuven and Shimon are married to Sarah and Rivka, and they're sisters. Vechad mufne, and then Levi is single. Mei sechem mibayle achayis. If Reuven dies, vasa ba mufne mimer, and then Levi does mimer with Sarah, v'achakach meis ochiv hasheni, and then Shimon dies. Beis Shammai om ishto imo. That Beis Shammai says, look, Levi already did mimer with Sarah. They're married. V'alezu teitzo v'alezu teitze mishum achus isha, and Rivka is just potter from Yibum because it's the sister of Levi's wife Sarah. So we see that according to Beis Shammai, mimer is a stark kinyan. Reb Shimon, the Tanya is one of the Brayso Amar Lem Reb Shimon lachachamim, that Shimon said to the chacham that this is talking about a situation where you have Sarah needs to do Yibum, and then so Reuven's married to Sarah. Reuven dies. Shimon and Levi have a zika with Sarah, and both Shimon and Levi do Yibum with Sarah. The thing is, Shimon and Levi are both 9 years old in a day. So says Reb Shimon that in this case, in Bias Rishon Bia, if the Bia of Shimon, who's 9 years old in a day, is a proper Yibum, Bias Sheni ain't a Bia, well then Levi's Bia is nothing, and Bias Rishon ain't a Bia, and if Shimon's Bia is nothing, Bia Sheni Nami ain't a Bia, so then Levi's Bia is also irrelevant. Bias Ben Tesha D'Chemaimer Shavua Rabbanon, and the rabbis treat the Bia of a 9-year-old like Maimer. Become Reb Shimon ain't a Bia, and Reb Shimon is saying that if Shimon's Bia works, so then Levi's is irrelevant, i.e., and if we're treating that like Maimer, so then Maimer is entirely Kona. There's nothing left. Benazai Titania, Benazai, as we learn in the Brayso, Benazai almost says Benama Yesh Maimer Acher Maimer Bishne Yevamin v'Yevama Achas, that when you have Reuven is married to Sarah, Reuven dies, and then there's Shimon and Levi. So there is Maimer Acher Maimer when there are Shimon and Levi. Ve'ein Maimer Acher Maimer B'shtei Yevamos v'Yavam Echad. However, if Reuven is married to Sarah and Rivka, and then Reuven dies, and then there's just Shimon, so then there's no Maimer Acher Maimer. Right? If Shimon does Maimer with Sarah and then does Maimer with Rivka, the Maimer with Rivka is irrelevant. So we see that according to that opinion of Ben Azai, once you do Maimer, there's nothing left after that. Reb Nechemia and Reb Nechemia Ditnan, as we learn in our Mishnah, Reb Nechemia Omer says, Reb Nechemia Achas Be'ila V'achas Chalitza, that whether it comes to Be'ila, whether it comes to Chalitza, Bein Batchila, whether you did it at the beginning, Bein Be'emtza, whether it was in the middle, Bein Basof, whether it was at the end, Ein Acharei Klum, there is nothing after that. V'abia Psula D'Chemaimer Shavua Rabban V'Katani Ein Acharei Klum. And if we're talking about Bia that happens after, Maimer or Getz, and that means that it is sort of a Bia Psula, it's like a deficient Bia, and still he's saying, Ein Acharei Klum, you don't have to do anything after that. So we see, and the rabbis treat that like Maimer. So therefore, we see that the rabbis, that Rebbe Nechemia is assuming that Maimer, there's nothing that comes after that either. Friends, that was Daf Nun Aleph of Masechta Yevamos. Hope you enjoyed. Peace out.